David Chen was 47 years old, a widowed father from Fresno, California, and he had just scored 184 points on Family Feud Fast Money. 16 points short of the 200 he needed to win $20,000 for his 6-year-old son's kidney transplant surgery. When the red board flashed that final number, David did not collapse. He did not cry. He simply stood at the podium and said 6 words into the microphone that stopped Steve Harvey cold in the middle of the stage. "I'm sorry, Lucas. I tried." Then he turned and walked off the set without waiting for Steve to close the segment, without hugging his family, without acknowledging the 214 audience members who were already beginning to stand up. A producer named Jenna Rodriguez ran after him. She caught him in the hallway behind the green room, leaning against a cinder block wall with his forehead pressed to the concrete. She had worked on that show for 11 years. She had never seen a contestant walk off the stage mid-taping. Not once. She ran back to the studio and whispered something into Steve's earpiece. Steve Harvey's face changed in a way the crew had never seen. He set his cue cards down on the podium, and what Steve Harvey did in the next 14 minutes would be watched by 412 million people across 37 countries, and would permanently change how Family Feud tapes its Fast Money rounds forever. The taping was scheduled for Wednesday, March 18, 2026, at the Family Feud studio in Atlanta. The Chen family from Fresno had flown in on a Tuesday red-eye, 5 of them crammed into economy seats because David had refused to let his mother pay for the extra baggage. Their opponents were the Okonkwo family from Houston, a Nigerian-American family led by a retired civil engineer named Emmanuel, who had taught his 4 children to play feud as a weekly ritual around the kitchen table. The 2 families had met in the green room at 7:14 that morning. Emmanuel had prayed over the Chen family before the taping started, not because he knew what they were carrying, but because that's what Emmanuel did with every stranger he met. David had gripped his hand and said, "Thank you," in a voice that sounded like it was coming from a long way off. His sister May had watched from across the room, concerned, because David had barely eaten anything for 3 days, and he was swaying slightly on his feet. But nobody in that studio knew what was about to happen. Lucas Chen had been diagnosed with focal segmental glomerulosclerosis on January 8, 2024, when he was 4 years old. It was a rare kidney disease that had scarred the filtering units of both his kidneys to the point where, by late 2025, he was on dialysis 4 days a week at Valley Children's Hospital in Madera, California. The pediatric nephrologist had put him on the transplant list in April 2025. In November 2025, a match was found, a living donor. A 34-year-old stranger from Oregon who had seen David's GoFundMe on Facebook and gotten herself tested without telling anyone. Her name was Sarah Kowalski. She was a kindergarten teacher. She had written David a letter that simply said, "I have 2 kidneys. Lucas needs one. Please let me give it to him." David had read that letter 847 times. He had it folded in his wallet that morning in the Feud studio. The surgery was scheduled for April 6, 2026, 19 days after the taping. Everything was ready. The hospital, the surgical team. Sarah Kowalski had flown to Fresno twice already for cross-matching. The only thing standing between Lucas Chen and a new kidney was money. David's health insurance, through his employer at a regional trucking logistics company, classified the specific immunosuppressant protocol Lucas would need after the transplant as a Tier 6 specialty drug. The copay for the first year alone was $38,400. The hospital required proof of payment arrangement before the surgery could be scheduled. David had $7,200 in savings. He had borrowed $4,000 from his sister. He had sold his late wife's engagement ring for $2,100 to a pawn shop on Blackstone Avenue that had seemed disrespectful even to walk into. He had taken a hardship withdrawal from his 401k for $6,300. He was still $18,800 short of the down payment the hospital required by March 25th. The first insurance appeal was denied on January 19, 2026. Reason: specialty medication not deemed medically necessary when generic alternatives exist. There were no generic alternatives. David spent $800 he didn't have on an attorney who specialized in insurance appeals. The second appeal was denied on February 11th. Reason: treatment plan deemed experimental pending additional clinical trial data. The protocol had been FDA approved for pediatric transplants in 2019. David called the insurance company 23 times in February. He spoke to 23 different representatives. He was placed on hold for a combined total of 41 hours that month. He was told, in various ways, that the decision had been made, that the decision could not be changed, that he could file another appeal that would take 90 to 120 days to process. Lucas did not have 90 to 120 days. Lucas had 19. David's wife, Lynn, had died of a brain aneurysm on Lucas's third birthday, March 11, 2023. She had been blowing out the candles on Lucas's cake when she collapsed. She was dead before the ambulance arrived. David had raised Lucas alone for 3 years. He had learned to braid his son's hair for picture day. He had learned to pack a school lunch that a 4-year-old would actually eat. He had learned to answer questions like, "Where did Mommy go?" in a way that didn't break the child's heart or his own. And on the night of February 27, 2026, when Lucas asked him if the transplant was going to happen, David told him yes. He said everything was paid for. He said the doctors had told him Lucas would be running around again by summer. He said there was nothing to worry about. Lucas had looked up at him from the dialysis chair with eyes that had grown too large for his shrinking face, and said the 11 words that had broken David's last remaining piece of heart. "Daddy, are you going to die like Mommy if I die?" David had not answered. He had walked into the hospital hallway and sat down on the floor next to a vending machine and wept silently into the sleeve of his jacket. A janitor named Carlos had walked past, stopped, come back, and handed him a bottle of water without saying a word. 3 weeks later, David was on a plane to Atlanta, and that wasn't even the part that made Steve cry. The feud application had been Lucas's idea. The boy had watched the show every weekday afternoon during his dialysis sessions because the hospital TV in the pediatric wing was permanently tuned to the daytime block. He had said, one afternoon in December, "Daddy, you're good at games. You should go on that show. You could win us money." David had laughed. He had applied as a joke that night. The call came on February 14th, Valentine's Day. The day David would have been married to Lynn for 14 years. The regular rounds of the taping went well. The Chen family won the first face-off. The Okonkwo's took the second. David played well enough. He smiled when he was supposed to smile. He laughed at Steve's jokes. But anyone watching closely would have noticed that his eyes never quite focused, that his hand kept going to his back pocket, where Sarah Kowalski's letter was folded against his wallet, that his breathing was shallow and controlled, like a man running a marathon on willpower alone. The Chens won the final round by 36 points. They were going to fast money. His sister May went first and scored 79. A poor round. She apologized 14 times walking back to the family line. David said it was fine. He said he would handle it. He walked to the podium. He needed 121 points to hit 200. The questions came. David answered. His voice sounded far away even to himself. Name a bird that can't fly. Penguin. 43. Name something you find in a desk drawer. Pen. 28. On and on. His mind kept drifting to Lucas's dialysis schedule. Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday. 4 days a week, for 19 more days. And when the final question was answered and the board lit up, the number was 184. 184. 16 short. The studio fell completely silent. David stared at the board. He did not move. He did not cry. Something inside him had already emptied out in the Fresno parking lot 3 weeks earlier, and there was nothing left to spill. He leaned toward the microphone and said, quietly, almost to himself, "I'm sorry, Lucas. I tried." Then he walked off the stage. The audience did not know what to do. Steve stood frozen for a full 3 seconds, which is an eternity on live television, before the producer whispered in his ear. Steve set his cue cards on the podium. He turned to the audience and said 3 words into the microphone that changed the entire tone of the room. "Everybody stay seated." Then he walked off the stage himself, through the set doors, down the back hallway, until he found David Chen leaning against a cinder block wall with his forehead pressed to the concrete. Steve did not say anything for a long moment. He just stood there. Then he reached out and put one hand on the back of David's neck, the way a father might do to a grown son, and he said, "Talk to me, brother. Who is Lucas?" David Chen was carrying a secret that would soon change everything. And in that hallway, with a camera operator who had followed Steve standing 10 feet away and recording everything, David told Steve the whole story. Lynn dying on Lucas's birthday, the kidney disease, Sarah Kowalski from Oregon, the $38,400, the 23 phone calls, the letter in his wallet, the 11 words his son had said in the dialysis chair. He pulled Sarah's letter out of his wallet with shaking hands and gave it to Steve. Steve read it. Steve read it twice. Then Steve folded it carefully and put it in his own jacket pocket and said, "Come with me." He walked David back onto the stage. The audience, who had been murmuring uncertainly for 4 minutes, went completely still. Steve brought David to the center of the stage and held up one hand to the cameras. "Keep rolling," Steve said. "Don't stop. I don't care what the producers want. Keep rolling." The studio fell completely silent. Steve turned to the audience. "I want you all to meet a man named David Chen. And I want you to meet his son, who isn't here, but whose name is Lucas. And I'm going to tell you what this man has been carrying while he was up here answering questions about birds and desk drawers." Steve told the story. Every detail. The transplant, the insurance denials, the 19 days, the $38,400, the dialysis chair conversation. When Steve repeated Lucas's 11 words out loud, the audience made a sound like a collective wound, and 3 audience members stood up because they could not sit still. Emmanuel Okonkwo, across the stage with his family, was holding his wife's hand and weeping openly. Steve turned to David. "Let me tell you something, David. 30 years ago, an old man walked up to me at a gas station in Cleveland. I was living in my 1976 Ford Tempo at the time. 3 years in that car, showering in truck stop bathrooms, eating out of dumpsters behind restaurants. That old man looked at me and he said, 'Son, God's got a plan bigger than your pain.' I held on to that sentence for 7 years until it came true. And I promised God that if I ever got out of that car, I would spend the rest of my days being the old man at the gas station for somebody else. Steve paused. David, today I'm the old man at the gas station, and you are me in 1988. Steve turned to a producer. Get me my phone, and get me the Zoom setup. Now! I don't care if we're behind schedule. Now! But Steve wasn't done. The producer ran. 30 seconds later, a second producer rolled out a monitor on a stand. The in-house tech team, trained to respond to Steve's requests during tapings, had a video connection ready in under 2 minutes. Steve looked at the camera and said, "Everybody watching at home, what you are about to see has never happened on this show in 17 years. We are about to make a live video call during a taping. The producers are going to get fired tomorrow if this doesn't work out. Let's do it anyway." He dialed a number he had memorized. A woman answered on the second ring. The screen lit up. Dr. Michelle Okafor, Chief of Pediatric Transplant Surgery at Emory University Hospital in Atlanta, Georgia, appeared on the monitor in her white coat with a stethoscope around her neck. "Steve? What's happening?" "Michelle, I'm on the set. I've got a dad here whose son needs a kidney transplant in 19 days in Fresno. The surgery's scheduled, the donor's ready. Insurance is fighting him on the aftercare drugs. He's $18,800 short on the down payment. The hospital needs it by March 25th, or they cancel the surgery." Dr. Okafor was silent for 3 seconds. "Steve, can you get the boy to Atlanta?" Steve turned to David. David's mouth moved, but no sound came out. He nodded. "Michelle, yes. Whatever you need." "Then bring him here. I'll do the surgery myself. The foundation covers everything. The drugs, the aftercare, 5 years of monitoring, everything. And Sarah Kowalski flies first class." Steve was crying, openly. The kind of crying that is not beautiful on television. "Michelle, you know I love you, right?" "I know, Steve. Put the father on." David stepped forward on legs that were no longer working properly. He looked at the monitor. Dr. Okafor looked back at him and said, in the voice of someone who had told thousands of parents the worst possible news and the best possible news, "Mr. Chen, your son is going to live. Do you hear me? Your son is going to live." David Chen fell to his knees on the Family Feud stage. Not theatrically, not for the cameras. His legs simply stopped holding him. He sank to the floor and put his hands over his face and made a sound that was not crying, was not laughing, was something older than both. Steve knelt down next to him, right there on the stage floor, in front of 214 people. Steve Harvey knelt down next to David Chen and put his arm around him. And Steve said, loud enough for the microphone to catch, 5 words that would become the most replayed 5 words in the show's entire broadcast history. "You are not alone anymore." The studio fell completely silent. Then, the 214 audience members rose to their feet, as one, and applauded for 4 full minutes. The crew was crying. The camera operators, the lighting technicians, the audio engineers. Jenna Rodriguez, the producer who had run after David in the hallway, was sitting in a folding chair off-camera with her head in her hands. But Steve wasn't done. He helped David to his feet and turned to face the cameras. "Everyone watching at home, I need to speak to you directly. There are 147,000 children in America right now waiting for organ transplants. There are thousands of parents like David Chen who are doing everything right and still losing. We are not going to accept that anymore. Not on my watch. Not while I have breath." Steve pulled the $20,000 fast money check from the podium. "David, you earned this. I don't care what the board said. You earned this 100 times over." He placed it in David's hands. Then he turned to the Okonkwo family. "Emmanuel, I need to talk to you." Emmanuel Okonkwo stepped forward from his family's line. He was 68 years old, dark suit, white handkerchief folded in his breast pocket. His eyes were red. Steve said, "Y'all came here today to win some money. Your family deserves it, so we're giving you $20,000 too. Nobody leaves this stage empty-handed." Emmanuel held up his hand. "Mr. Harvey, with all respect, sir, I have to refuse." The audience went still. "My family has been blessed. My children are healthy. Our bills are paid. Please, sir, add that $20,000 to whatever you are doing for Lucas, and my church in Houston will match it. I will call my pastor tonight. $40,000 from the Okonkwos to the Chen family, and we will pray for Lucas every day until he is well." David Chen turned to Emmanuel. The two men walked toward each other. They met in the middle of the stage, and they held each other like brothers who had known each other for 50 years, and the cameras caught all of it. Steve looked at the camera and said the sentence that would be printed on foundation t-shirts and stitched on quilts and tattooed on strangers' arms for the next decade. "This is why we're here." The episode aired 4 weeks later, on April 15, 2026, 9 days after Lucas Chen's successful kidney transplant at Emory University Hospital. By the end of the first 72 hours, it had been viewed 134 million times on YouTube. By the end of the first week, 289 million across all platforms. The final Nielsen-verified number, 90 days after air, was 412 million views across 37 countries. The hashtag #NotAloneAnymore trended worldwide for 23 consecutive days. Donations to the Steve and Marjorie Harvey Foundation arrived at a rate that crashed the donation server twice in the first 48 hours. By the end of the first month, $19.7 million had been donated, specifically earmarked for what was named the Lucas Fund, a dedicated program for pediatric transplant aftercare coverage for families denied by insurance. Lucas Chen received his kidney from Sarah Kowalski on April 6, 2026, as scheduled. The surgery was performed by Dr. Michelle Okafor at Emory in a 9-hour procedure. Sarah was flown first class, put up in a hotel, and her own recovery costs were fully covered. She and Lucas met for the first time on April 12th in his hospital room, and she read him a children's book about a princess and a dragon. By August 2026, 4 months post-surgery, Lucas was off dialysis for the first time since he was 4 years old. By December 2026, he was back in first grade, playing soccer during recess, growing again. By his 7th birthday, March 11, 2027, the anniversary of his mother's death, he was taller than he had been in 2 years. The Lucas Fund, which Steve had seeded with $500,000 of his personal money, grew to $62 million within 14 months. It has to date funded aftercare medication coverage for 2,341 pediatric transplant patients whose families had been denied by insurance. Dr. Michelle Okafor was appointed the fund's medical director. In a television interview, she was asked why she had agreed so quickly to take Lucas's case. She said, "Because I have been a doctor for 28 years, and I have never once been called during a taping of a game show. I knew it had to be serious. And when I saw that father's face on the monitor, I saw my own father, who worked 2 jobs to pay for my medical school. I was not going to say no." David Chen left his trucking job in June 2026. Steve Harvey hired him as a family advocate for the Lucas Fund, a role created specifically for him. His job was to sit across from other parents of children denied transplant aftercare and tell them what had happened to him. David has now sat with 1,047 families. All 1,047 of them have received treatment funding. In an interview, he was asked what he tells them. He said, "I tell them I walked off the Family Feud stage at 184. I tell them the number doesn't decide your son's life. I tell them somebody is about to stop everything for them. They just have to keep breathing until that person shows up." The Okonkwo family was flown to Los Angeles in October 2026. Emmanuel's church in Houston, true to his word, had sent $20,000 to the Chen family within 72 hours of the taping. Steve presented Emmanuel with a $100,000 gift for the church's ongoing transplant ministry, which Emmanuel had quietly started 5 years earlier with no publicity. Emmanuel wept at the pulpit the first Sunday he told his congregation what had happened. He said, "I did not give up $20,000. I gave it to Jesus, who already had it, and who returned it to me 100 times over in the form of a boy's life." Steve Harvey was interviewed by Gayle King in February 2027. She asked him about the moment he left the stage to find David in the hallway. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I have been in this business for 40 years. I have hosted every kind of game show you can think of. And I have learned exactly one thing that matters. You don't host a show. You host a human being. And when that human being is breaking, you leave the stage. You find them. You kneel down next to them. And you tell them they are not alone. Everything else is decoration." On a Tuesday morning in March 2027, 1 year after David Chen walked onto the Family Feud stage, a little boy named Lucas Chen, 7 years old, with a small scar on his lower abdomen and a full head of thick, dark hair, sat at a kitchen table in a modest house in Fresno, California. He was drawing a picture. It was a father and a son holding hands in front of a hospital building, and above them, floating in the sky, a woman with long hair and a soft smile. He wrote 3 words across the top of the drawing in careful 7-year-old letters. "We are okay." Sometimes a man walks off a stage at 184 and the whole world follows him into the hallway. Sometimes the phone call that saves a life is made on live television by a man who was once homeless in a 1976 Ford Tempo and who never forgot what that felt like. And sometimes, the distance between a dying child and a living child is one host who refuses to let a taping end quietly. If this story touched your heart, take a moment right now to smash that subscribe button and turn on notifications so the next one finds you. Share this with a parent you know who has ever felt alone in a hospital hallway. And if you believe that kindness is still the most powerful force in the world, type the word "believe" in the comments below so we can find each other.